After a failed mission that cost a teammate's life, a Navy SEAL went into the mountains to forget. He chose a remote, desolate wilderness for a quiet camping trip, hoping the silence would numb his thoughts. Far from marked trails, he discovered a hidden cave that didn't exist on any map. Inside the cold darkness, he found a German shepherd abandoned and barely alive.
Juniper?
The dog didn't cry or fight. It stared at him with an
Hey,
unsettling
it's all right.
calm, as if
I
it
got you.
already knew him. What the Navy SEAL didn't know was that this dog carried a memory someone had tried to erase. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, or leave a comment sharing how this story made you feel. If you want more stories like this, please like and
Juniper,
subscribe. Help us reach
you hear me?
1,000 subscribers
Are you
so
all
we
right
can
down
keep
there?
creating meaningful
Elias,
stories.
are you-
Elias Hartman arrived at Glacier National Park on a morning so clear it almost felt staged, as if someone had scrubbed the sky clean overnight. Northern light lay gently across the mountains, pale and forgiving, the kind that softened edges instead of sharpening them. At 37, Elias stood just over 6 feet tall, lean and tightly built, a body shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. He moved with an economy of motion, nothing wasted, nothing hurried, like a man who had learned that speed was useful, but stillness could save lives. He was on mandatory leave from the Navy SEALs. Officially, it was called rest and recovery. Unofficially, it was distance. Distance from command, from decisions, from the quiet judgment that followed a mission gone wrong. Elias told people he needed nature. What he needed was silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, absorbing udence that left no room for memory to speak. 3 months earlier, on a night operation overseas, he had hesitated, only seconds. But seconds were enough. A blast, smoke, a voice cut short over comms. Since then, sleep had become something fragile and unreliable. Elias walked to exhaust himself. He exhausted himself to forget. Glacier was mercilessly beautiful. Pine forests stretched in disciplined ranks, their dark needles swaying under a sky the color of old glass. Meltwater fed lakes so clear they looked unreal, as if depth itself had been erased. Wind carried the scent of ice, loosening its grip, mixed with sap and stone. On the main trail, tourists laughed, paused for photos, spoke loudly in the careless way of people who assumed the ground beneath them was safe. Elias turned off onto a narrower path, one barely worn. It was instinct more than choice. He had always favored the edges, perimeters, flanks, places where fewer eyes lingered. His boots crunched softly against gravel and old leaves. The sound was grounding, predictable. He heard it when the sun was already high. Not birds, not wind, a sound that didn't belong. It was faint at first, easy to dismiss. Elias stopped anyway. Years of training had wired him to pause when something felt wrong, even if he couldn't yet name it. The sound came again, thin, strained, almost swallowed by the earth itself. Breath, being crushed. Elias followed it downhill, every sense narrowing. The forest thinned into a shallow depression where the ground dipped unnaturally, as if something beneath it had collapsed long ago. He stepped closer and felt his stomach tighten. A hole, not a natural one. The edges were too sharp, the drop too sudden. It was the remains of an old mining shaft, partially hidden by brush and time. No warning signs, no fencing. Nothing marked it on the park maps posted near the visitor center. It was a scar that had been left uncovered. Elias knelt and peered down. At the bottom, wrapped in shadow and cool air, lay a German shepherd. She was female, medium-sized, but frighteningly thin. Her once thick coat matted with dirt and dried blood. The sable pattern of her fur, golden tan broken by black along her back and neck, was dulled by neglect. One foreleg was twisted at an unnatural angle, trembling with the effort to keep her body upright. Her ribs showed faintly beneath her skin, but none of that was what froze Elias in place. It was her eyes. They were amber, dark and lucid, fixed on him with a focus that had nothing to do with panic. She wasn't whining. She wasn't scrambling. She wasn't begging. She was watching him, measuring. The look struck him with unsettling familiarity. Elias had seen it before, in teammates pinned under debris and civilians trapped beneath rubble, in men who knew rescue was possible but not guaranteed. It was the look of someone asking a single unspoken question. Are you going to act or walk away? Elias swallowed. His pulse slowed, sharpening instead of racing. He shifted closer to the edge, careful not to loosen the gravel beneath his boots. Easy, he murmured, his voice low, controlled. He didn't know why he spoke, perhaps because silence in that moment felt like abandonment. The dog's ears flicked. One stood fully upright, the other bore a small notch near the tip, an old injury that had healed poorly. Her body shook with exhaustion, but her gaze never left him. Elias scanned the shaft, 10, maybe 12 feet deep, steep sides, loose soil near the top. A fall like that wouldn't have been survivable without luck. As if summoned by the sound of his breath, the dog shifted. She braced herself and scraped one paw weakly against the wall of the hole. Dirt crumbled away, revealing something beneath the surface. Red paint. A crude arrow, angled downward, half faded, but unmistakable. Elias felt a cold line trace its way along his spine. He recognized that symbol. Years ago, on a mission that would never be written down, he had seen it sprayed on the side of a concrete culvert in a desert half a world away. It had meant disposal. A place where something or someone wasn't meant to be found. A solution applied quickly when time and options ran out. The forest around him seemed to quiet, as if the land itself were listening. This wasn't an accident. The realization landed heavily, rearranging everything he thought he understood about the scene. The dog hadn't fallen, she hadn't wandered, she hadn't slipped, she had been put here. Elias leaned back on his heels, drawing a slow breath through his nose. He studied her injuries again with new eyes. The abrasions around her neck that weren't consistent with a fall. The rope burns faint but unmistakable beneath dried blood. The controlled stillness she maintained despite pain. This dog had been handled, restrained, trained, and discarded. As Elias reached for the coil of rope in his pack, the dog suddenly reacted. Her body tensed, ears snapping forward, eyes shifting, not to him but past him, toward the trees behind. A low sound vibrated in her chest, not a growl, a warning. Elias turned instinctively, scanning the forest. Nothing moved, no footsteps, no voices, just wind through branches and the distant rush of meltwater. When he looked back down, the dog's gaze had returned to him, but something had changed. She wasn't only asking for help anymore. She was urging him to hurry. Elias moved with purpose now. He anchored the rope around a thick pine, testing the knot with practiced efficiency. His hands knew what to do, even if his mind hadn't caught up. As he prepared to descend, he caught himself thinking something dangerously close to belief, that if he'd chosen a different trail this morning, even by minutes, she would already be dead. The thought settled into him like weight. He lowered himself carefully into the shaft, boots scraping against packed earth. The air was cooler below, damp and metallic. When he reached her, the dog flinched only slightly, then held herself still. Up close, she was younger than he'd expected. Maybe 4 years old enough to have been through something, young enough that survival still lived in her muscles. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her eyes followed every movement of his hands. "You're not done yet," Elias said quietly, unsure whether he was talking to her or to himself. She blinked once, Above them, sunlight cut across the rim of the hole, a reminder of the world waiting beyond. Elias tightened his grip on the rope and began to plan the climb. Behind his calm, something unfamiliar stirred. Not adrenaline, not duty, responsibility, and for the first time in months, Elias Hartman didn't feel like he was walking to forget. He felt like he had been stopped on purpose. On. The rope creaked softly as Elias Hartman eased his weight into it. The sound was small, almost polite, but in the hollow of the old shaft it echoed like a warning. Loose dirt slid beneath his boots, tapping against stone as he descended. The air changed the farther he went down, cooler, heavier, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded him of basements and forgotten places. Every movement was measured. He tested each foothold before trusting it, fingers biting into the rope with practiced confidence. This was familiar territory for his body, even if his mind resisted naming it. Risk assessment, weight distribution, exit angles. The things that stayed when everything else fell apart. When his boots finally touched the packed earth at the bottom, Elias felt it immediately. The dog was too light. When she shifted toward him, her body pressed briefly against his shin, and the lack of weight startled him more than her injuries. She should have been solid, muscular, dense, with strength the way working dogs usually were. Instead, she felt fragile, almost hollow, as if hunger had carved something essential out of her. He crouched slowly, lowering himself to her level. Up close, the damage was clearer. Her front left leg trembled under her, bent at an angle that made Elias tighten his jaw. The fur along her chest and neck was stiff with old blood, darker where it had dried against her skin beneath that. Faint abrasions circled her throat, not raw but healed just enough to tell a story of restraint that had lasted far longer than any accident would justify. Yet despite all of that, she was careful. When Elias shifted his weight, she adjusted hers. When he reached for her shoulder, she leaned just enough to steady him without collapsing herself. It wasn't instinctive panic or blind trust. It was calculation. This dog had learned how to survive by managing the space around people. "You're doing all the work, aren't you?" Elias said quietly. Her ears flicked, the uninjured ones swiveling toward his voice. Her breathing was shallow but controlled. She watched his hands closely, eyes tracking each movement with deliberate focus. Elias slid one arm beneath her chest, supporting her weight as carefully as he could. His other hand tested the rope, pulling it taut. The shaft walls were unstable. Chunks of old stone and soil clung together more by habit than strength. That was when the ground above them vibrated. It was subtle, just a tremor, easily missed. Elias felt it through the rope before he heard it. A low hum, distant but unmistakable. An engine. He froze. The sound wasn't close enough to pinpoint, but it wasn't far either. It traveled through the earth in a way that told him it wasn't a passing tourist vehicle on the main road. It was slower, heavier, intentional. His shoulders tightened. This area wasn't as forgotten as it looked. Before he could react, the dog did. She jerked the rope hard, enough to pull Elias slightly off balance. The movement was sudden, urgent, not random. She followed it immediately with a sharp, breathless huff, her body tensing as if bracing for impact. "Hey!" Elias started. The word barely left his mouth before the world shifted. A slab of stone tore loose from the shaft wall above them, crashing down into the space Elias had occupied seconds earlier. Dust exploded outward, filling the air with grit and noise. The impact shook the ground beneath his feet, rattling the rope and sending a shower of dirt cascading down. Elias swore under his breath, heart hammering now. He dragged the dog closer to him instinctively, shielding her with his body until the debris settled. Silence rushed back in, thicker than before. He stared at the spot where the rock had landed, then slowly looked down at the dog. She was watching him, Not startled, not confused, certain. The realization hit him with a strange mix of awe and unease. She hadn't reacted to the falling stone. She'd reacted before it fell. "You felt that," he said. Her tail moved once against the dirt, a minimal gesture, almost restrained. Elias exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Whatever this dog was, she wasn't just injured. She was aware in a way that made the hair along his arms lift. He didn't waste time after that. With deliberate care, Elias looped the rope beneath her torso, adjusting the tension so it wouldn't bite into her ribs or aggravate her injured leg. She tolerated the contact without resistance, muscles taut but compliant, trusting him in the cautious way of someone who had learned trust could be revoked without warning. When he gave the rope a firm tug, testing it, she shifted her weight exactly as needed. Together they began the ascent. It was slow, painfully so. Elias climbed first, anchoring himself at intervals, hauling her upward a few inches at a time. His arms burned with effort, sweat dampening his palms despite the cool air. Each pull felt heavier than it should have, not because of her weight, but because of the stakes. Halfway up, the engine sound returned, closer this time. Elias paused, holding both himself and the dog still. The rope strained against his shoulder. He listened, counting breaths, heart thudding loud in his ears. The sound moved past, drifting away through the forest. Whatever vehicle it was didn't stop, at least not yet. He didn't wait for a second chance. With a final effort, Elias hauled her up over the edge of the shaft and onto solid ground. She collapsed onto the grass immediately, sides heaving, chest fluttering with shallow breaths that steamed faintly in the cooler air. Elias dropped beside her, one knee hitting the dirt as he sucked in a lungful of air. His hands shook, not from fear but from the delayed release of tension. He pressed his palms into the ground, grounding himself, then turned back to her. She lay still, eyes half-lidded, every breath an effort. But even now, she hadn't surrendered. Her gaze shifted slowly, deliberately toward the edge of the hole, as if committing it to memory. Elias followed her line of sight. The shaft yawned darkly behind them, silent now, indifferent. "You don't want to forget it," he murmured. The dog's ears twitched. She tried to lift her head, failed, and settled again with a faint exhale. That was when Elias noticed the mark on her ear. It wasn't fresh. The edges were clean, healed over. A small, deliberate cut near the tip, shaped too evenly to be accidental. He'd seen similar marks before, not on animals, but on equipment, identifiers, quick, brutal, efficient, a label. "This wasn't an accident," Elias said quietly. He reached for his pack, pulling out a bottle of water and dribbling a small amount onto his fingers. He let the drops touch her tongue first, gauging her reaction. She accepted it cautiously, lapping weakly, then stopped herself as if remembering a rule she'd been punished for breaking before. The restraint cut deeper than any wound. Elias sat back on his heels, studying her more carefully now. She was a German shepherd, likely working line rather than show. Leaner, longer in the leg, built for endurance instead of display. Despite her condition, there was nothing clumsy about her. Every movement, even in pain, was precise. "How old are you?" he asked absurdly. She blinked at him, slow and steady. Elias glanced toward the trees again, a ripple of unease sliding through him. He couldn't explain it, but the sense of being watched hadn't faded. It hovered at the edge of his awareness, subtle but persistent. He pushed himself to his feet and slung the pack over one shoulder. Carefully, he slid an arm beneath the dog's chest and hindquarters, lifting her against his body. She weighed almost nothing. As he started toward the trail, he felt her tense briefly, then relax. Her head rested against his shoulder, breath warm against his neck. "I've got you," he said more firmly this time. The words felt like a promise he hadn't planned to make. Halfway up the slope, he paused. He didn't know why, only that something inside him insisted. He looked down at the dog in his arms. "You need a name," he said. She shifted slightly, eyes opening just enough to meet his. "Juniper," Elias decided. The name came without effort, like it had been waiting. They grow where it's cold, where other things don't. Her tail flicked once. At the edge of the trees, Elias stopped again. The forest was still, no movement, no sound beyond the wind through branches, and yet he felt it, a presence not close enough to confront, not far enough to ignore. When he turned fully, scanning the woods, there was nothing there. Just shadow and light playing tricks between trunks. He adjusted his grip on Juniper and kept moving. Behind them, the hole remained quiet and patient, as if it had never opened its mouth at all. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, a low, single-story building tucked between a hardware store and a diner that smelled faintly of grease even with its lights off. It wasn't new, but it was clean in the way places became clean when the same careful hands had tended them for years. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, steady and impersonal. Elias carried Juniper through the door without hesitation. The bell above the entrance rang once, sharp and thin. The sound made Juniper stiffen in his arms. Her breathing quickened, not in panic, but in anticipation, as if she were bracing for something she had learned to expect. Indoors, a woman emerged from behind the counter almost immediately. Dr. Nora Whitaker was in her early 40s, medium height, slender without being fragile. Her posture was upright, economical, as if she conserved energy even when standing still. Sandy blonde hair was pulled back into a practical bun, strands already escaping around her temples. She wore rectangular glasses that magnified sharp green eyes that noticed details most people missed. She took one look at Juniper and didn't ask questions. "Bring her in," Nora said, already moving. Her voice was calm, steady, trained for emergencies, not drama. The exam room smelled of disinfectant and clean towels. Nora guided Elias to the table, then gestured for him to lower Juniper gently. The dog hesitated only a moment before allowing herself to be set down, muscles rigid beneath her skin. Nora's hands were confident, practiced. She didn't rush. She started with observation, eyes tracing posture, breathing, micro-movements. When Juniper flinched at the clink of metal instruments, Nora paused immediately, switching to her hands alone. Elias noticed everything. Juniper's body language changed with sound. Her ears flattened at the faint jingle of keys clipped to Nora's belt. Her eyes widened briefly, then went distant, fixed on nothing. "She's dissociating," Nora said quietly. "That's not fear. That's learned." Elias swallowed. Nora continued her examination, narrating softly, not for Elias's benefit, but for Juniper's. "Old bruising," she murmured, fingers pressing gently along Juniper's ribs. "Multiple timelines. This one's weeks old. This one's newer." She moved to the dog's neck, parting the matted fur carefully. "Rope burns, not fresh, sustained." Juniper did not growl. She did not snap. She simply went still. When Nora reached for a handheld scanner to check for a microchip, Juniper froze completely. Her breathing slowed, shallow and uneven, her muscles locking as if on command. Nora stopped mid-motion. "Hey," she said softly, lowering the scanner and holding her empty hand out, palm up. "You're safe." It took several long seconds before Juniper's chest rose more evenly again. Nora removed her glasses and rubbed at the bridge of her nose, a small crack in her. Professional composure. "This dog has been conditioned," she said finally. "Not trained. Conditioned." She resumed the exam without the scanner. Later, when Juniper was calmer, she tried again. The device beeped weakly, then died. "Microchip's been damaged," Nora said. Deliberately. Whoever did this didn't want her traceable. As she shaved a small patch of fur at Juniper's neck to clean a wound, Nora paused. "There it is," she said. Elias leaned closer. Beneath the fur, just below the jawline, was a small mark, inked into the skin. Not a name, not a symbol Elias recognized, just a sequence, J-09. Nora's jaw tightened. "That's not from any legal K-9 program," she said. "I've seen police dogs, military dogs, search and rescue. This isn't theirs." "What is it?" Elias asked. "A designation," Nora replied. "Inventory." The words settled heavily between them. "This dog wasn't abandoned," Nora continued. "She was removed." Juniper shifted slightly as if she sensed the weight of the conversation. Her eyes found Elias again, steady, alert. Nora finished stabilizing her leg and started fluids. As the IV drip began, Juniper's body finally slackened, exhaustion overtaking vigilance. "She's tough," Nora said, almost to herself, "but tough doesn't mean invincible." Elias nodded. He knew that lesson well. Later, while Nora stepped out to prepare medication, Elias remained in the dim exam room alone with Juniper. The steady beep of a monitor filled the space, rhythmic and reassuring. Juniper's eyes fluttered open. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her head just enough to look at him. Not pleading, not afraid. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the door, then back to Elias. It wasn't a warning this time. It was recognition, as if she understood something about him that he had spent months trying to outrun. Night settled quietly over the town. Elias waited in the clinic lobby while Nora completed paperwork. The chair beneath him was uncomfortable, but he didn't shift. Old habits kept him alert even when his body begged for rest. Through the front windows he could see the parking lot. Snowmelt puddles reflected the glow of street lamps. Nothing moved. At some point, a truck rolled in and parked far from the entrance, near the shadowed edge of the lot. It was an older model, dark-colored, its engine idling softly. No one got out, Elias noticed. He always noticed. The truck stayed there for hours. When Nora finally returned, she followed Elias's line of sight through the window. She didn't ask what he was looking at. She simply nodded once. "She'll need to stay overnight," Nora said. "Hypothermia, dehydration, trauma. I'll keep her warm." "Is she safe here?" Elias asked. Nora met his eyes. "As safe as I can make her." Elias left reluctantly. By the time he reached his car, the truck was gone. Morning came pale and cold. Elias returned early, the sky barely lightening. The parking lot was empty. He stopped short when he reached his vehicle. A small square of paper was tucked beneath his windshield wiper. No envelope, no name, just 3 words written in block letters. "Return the property." Elias stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping through his jacket, the paper fluttering slightly in the breeze. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Inside the clinic, Juniper slept beneath warming lamps, unaware that the world beyond the glass had already begun to close in. Elias watched her breathe, slow and steady. He understood then what the note meant. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Juniper refused to leave Glacier. It wasn't stubbornness. Elias recognized that much immediately. He had seen stubborn men dig in their heels out of pride or fear. This was different. This was purpose. The morning after the note appeared on his windshield, Elias returned to the clinic before sunrise. The air was sharp with cold, the mountains still holding the night in their shadows. Inside, Juniper stood on unsteady legs, bandaged and tethered to an IV stand, watching the door as if she'd been waiting for him. When Nora Whitaker unclipped the line and stepped back, Juniper didn't hesitate. She limped past Elias, slow but determined, then stopped just inside the doorway and looked over her shoulder. Not a plea, A direction. Elias felt the now familiar tightening in his chest, the sensation that came when logic lagged behind something older and quieter. He nodded once, more to himself than anyone else. "All right," he murmured. "Show me." They moved carefully, Juniper setting the pace. Her injured leg forced her to walk slowly, but her attention was fierce. She ignored the main trails, turning instead toward a network of older paths that cut through the trees like half-forgotten thoughts. The farther they went, the less the land felt curated. Fallen branches lay where they had dropped. Moss crept unchecked over stones. This part of the park hadn't been touched by signage or reassurance. Elias let her lead. The forest shifted subtly as they descended. Pines gave way to mixed growth, aspen and birch, their pale trunks catching the light. The air smelled different here, damp, metallic again. Juniper paused often, lifting her head, testing the wind with small, precise movements of her nose. She wasn't tracking a scent in the traditional sense. She was orienting herself. Elias followed, one hand resting near the strap of his pack, eyes scanning the terrain. Every few steps, Juniper would stop and look back, making sure he was still there. Each time he met her gaze, something eased between them, a mutual understanding that this wasn't about speed or efficiency. It was about memory. The structure emerged gradually from the trees. At first, Elias mistook it for a fallen shed, just a low, dark shape hunched beneath overgrowth. As they drew closer, the geometry sharpened. 4 walls, a pitched roof sagging under years of neglect, no windows. The door hung crooked on one hinge, scarred by deep scratches that had nothing to do with weather. A kennel. Juniper stopped 10 yards away. Her body trembled, not with fear, but with restraint. Her tail was low, motionless. One ear pinned back, the other stood rigid. Elias felt it then. The weight of the place, the way silence pressed in around it, as if the forest itself preferred to look away. He approached slowly. Inside, the smell hit him first. Old urine, rust, something sour that lingered in the throat. Chains lay coiled on the floor, some snapped, others still bolted to iron rings set into the concrete. Rope hung from a beam overhead, frayed where teeth had worried it over time. Bloodstains marked the wall, faint, smeared, deliberately scrubbed but never fully erased. On a rough wooden table near the back, a notebook lay open. Its pages were thin and brittle, corners curled. Most were torn out. What remained was a log, dates, initials, brief notations written in a hurried, utilitarian hand. Elias flipped through carefully. Wait, response time, compliance. Then one entry crossed out hard enough to tear the paper. J-09. Resistant Juniper made a sound behind him. Not a whine, not a growl, a low, involuntary exhale that carried more memory than sound. Elias turned. She stood in the doorway now, her injured leg trembling under her weight, eyes fixed on the chains nearest the wall. Her breathing had gone shallow again, but she didn't retreat. She leaned forward instead, as if bracing herself against something invisible. "You were here," Elias said quietly. Juniper's gaze shifted to him, steady and unflinching. He took out his phone and snapped photos of the notebook, the chains, the stains. He knew better than to touch anything else. Evidence had its own rules, even in places like this. There was a soft crunch of footsteps behind him. Elias turned instantly. A man stood several yards away, partially obscured by trees. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with a ranger's uniform worn the way people wore clothes they didn't think about anymore. His beard was graying at the edges, trimmed but uneven, and his eyes were sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "Didn't expect anyone back here," the man said. His tone wasn't hostile. It was cautious. "Neither did I." Elias replied. The man stepped closer, hands visible at his sides. "Name's Tom Halverson," he said. "I cover this section of the park." Halverson's gaze flicked briefly to Juniper, then back to Elias. There was recognition there, subtle but unmistakable. "She yours?" he asked. "Not officially," Elias said. "Not yet." Halverson nodded slowly. "I've seen her before." Elias stiffened. "Where?" "Couple months back," Halverson said. "Always from a distance, always near service roads, never close enough to catch." "Did you report it?" Halverson's jaw tightened. "I reported what I could, but without proof." He gestured toward the kennel. "This place was off the books, old lease, private use. By the time I got clearance to check it, it was empty." Elias held up the notebook. "Not empty enough." Halverson exhaled through his nose. "Damn." Juniper shifted then, moving past Elias and stepping fully into the kennel. She approached the nearest chain and stopped. Her body went rigid. Slowly, deliberately, she sat, right there, as if marking the spot. Halverson watched, his expression changing. "That's not random," he said quietly. Juniper lifted her head and looked directly at him. Her amber eyes held his for a long moment, unblinking. Halverson swallowed. "She remembers," he said. "Doesn't she?" Elias felt the words settle into him like a truth he'd been circling since the hole. They didn't stay long. Halverson radioed in what he could without drawing attention. Elias pocketed the photos and led Juniper back into the trees. She followed willingly now, as if some internal task had been completed. They reached a rise overlooking the old service road. From there, Elias could see tire tracks, fresh enough to matter. Juniper stopped again, ears forward, attention locked on the road below. Elias crouched beside her, one hand resting lightly against her shoulder. "Whatever you didn't do for them," he said softly, "it mattered." Juniper leaned into the touch, just slightly. Behind them, the forest resumed its quiet breathing. Ahead, the road curved out, of sight, carrying whatever secrets it held deeper into the mountains. Elias knew one thing for certain now. Juniper hadn't just survived, she had chosen, and that choice was still echoing. J-09. The memory that was never meant to survive. Elias did not leave Glacier. That decision formed quietly, without ceremony, somewhere between the tree line and the narrow dirt road that led back toward town. He didn't announce it to anyone, not even to himself. He simply kept driving past the turn he should have taken, following a route that curved deeper into the park toward higher ground and fewer questions. Seth Caldwell's voice echoed in his head, steady and unembellished, the way it always had been back when chaos was routine. "If the dog is still alive," Seth had said over the phone earlier that afternoon, "someone will want to know whether she remembers." Seth was a former SEAL like Elias, broad-shouldered, thick through the chest with a permanent crease between his brows. That came from years of scanning rooms before entering them. He'd left the teams with a knee injury and an even sharper distrust of institutions. Now he worked security and private, investigations, quiet jobs, favors traded carefully. "Dogs don't forget like people do," Seth had added. "They remember with their bodies." Elias glanced at Juniper in the passenger seat. She lay curled on a blanket, bandaged legs stretched stiffly forward, her sable coat dulled by exhaustion but still catching light where the gold threaded through black. Her eyes were open, always open, watching reflections slide across the windshield, tracking the road as if mapping it. She wasn't afraid. That was what unsettled him most. Juniper reacted to the world the way someone reacted after they had already survived the worst of it. No flinching, no panic, just assessment, recognition. The first sign came at a pullout near an abandoned maintenance road. Elias slowed to check the map on his phone. The engine dropped into idle. The sound barely changed, but Juniper's head lifted instantly. Her ears snapped forward, body tensing, nose lifting toward the cracked window. She inhaled, once. Oil. Old diesel, not fresh. The kind that clung to clothing and metal long after engines cooled. Juniper's tail stilled. Her jaw tightened. Not fear, focus. Elias shut the engine off completely. "What is it?" he murmured. Juniper did not look at him. She stared out the windshield toward the curve of road below, where the trees thinned just enough to reveal tire tracks, newer than they should have been. Elias felt the click inside his chest, the same internal shift that had once preceded action orders and extraction points. This wasn't coincidence. They reached the cabin just before dusk. It was a weathered structure perched near a frozen creek, built decades ago for seasonal rangers who no longer stayed that far out. One room, one porch, thick logs darkened by years of snow and sun. Elias had rented it for isolation, not defense, but isolation he knew could be turned either way. He carried Juniper inside and set her down near the small wood stove. She didn't explore, didn't sniff. She chose a spot where she could see the door and the single window at the same time, then settled with deliberate care. Elias watched her closely. As night fell, the world outside went quiet in the way mountains always did. No gradual fade, just a sudden absence. Even the creek seemed to hold its breath beneath the ice. Juniper's reaction sharpened. A distant engine downshifted somewhere beyond the ridge. Juniper's ears flicked. Her head turned, precise as a compass needle. A metallic clink. Something loose rattling in the cabin when the wind pushed just right. Juniper froze, eyes unfocused for a heartbeat, then deliberately forced herself to relax, exhaling slowly. Elias noticed her do it. "You taught yourself that," he said softly. Juniper glanced at him, amber eyes reflecting firelight. There was no confusion there, only acknowledgement. Later, when full darkness settled, Elias stepped onto the porch to scan the tree lines. The stars were sharp, cold pinpricks in the sky. He could hear his own breathing, nothing else. When he turned back inside, Juniper was standing. Not growling, not pacing. Standing, weight balanced despite the injury, gaze locked on the door. That was when Elias understood something fundamental. Juniper wasn't reacting to threat, she was responding to recognition. Rehook moment, Elias knelt slowly beside her, lowering himself into her line of sight. "Do you know them?" he asked. Juniper's ears shifted. Her gaze did not waver from the door, then just once. She made a sound Elias had never heard from her before, not a bark, not a growl, a short, controlled huff expelled through her nose, the sound of refusal. Elias felt it settle into him like a vow. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the small table with his phone and notebook, piecing together fragments Seth had sent him earlier. Company registrations, expired land use permits, shell logistics, firms that existed only on paper. Nothing illegal enough to trigger alarms, nothing clean enough to trust. The kennel wasn't a training site. It was a waypoint, a place to hold, test, and move assets quietly through land. No one watched closely anymore, and Juniper, J09, had been one of them. Not a weapon exactly, something worse. A tool meant to intimidate, to guard, to enforce compliance without drawing attention. Dogs were deniable, disposable, until one of them decided not to be. Juniper shifted behind him. Elias turned. She had moved closer, her body angled toward the door, but her eyes were on him now, searching, measuring his face the way she had that first moment in the hole. "You didn't do what they wanted," Elias said. Juniper lowered herself slowly into a sit. Her posture was controlled, disciplined, trained, but her eyes softened, just barely. "That cost you," he continued. Juniper blinked once. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the cabin wall, too distant to illuminate the interior, close enough to confirm suspicion. Elias killed the lamp instantly, plunging the room into darkness. He held his breath. The lights passed. The sound of tires on gravel faded. Juniper did not relax. She crept forward until her shoulder touched Elias's knee. A quiet contact, intentional. He placed a hand on her back, feeling the slow rise and fall beneath his palm. "You're not property," he whispered. "Not to me." Juniper leaned into the touch, not seeking comfort but accepting alliance. When dawn came, it did so reluctantly, pale light creeping through frost-laced glass. The world looked unchanged, innocent. But Elias knew better now. Juniper stood at the threshold as the sun rose, silhouette sharp against the cold light. She looked out across Glacier as if memorizing it, not as a refuge, but as territory that had witnessed her survival. Elias joined her. He didn't know yet what the next move would be, only that the past had reached out, and neither of them had stepped aside. J-09 had survived, and survival, Elias knew, always demanded an answer. When the past comes back for its witness. The man arrived just after noon when daylight made everything look less threatening than it was. Elias saw him from the cabin window first. A figure walking up the narrow gravel path with unhurried steps, hands visible, posture relaxed. The kind of man who understood how to look harmless. He wore a dark jacket zipped halfway up, clean jeans, boots with soles barely scuffed. Nothing tactical, nothing loud. Juniper noticed him before Elias did. She rose from her place near the stove without a sound. Her injured leg held, barely. Her ears tilted forward, then flattened slightly. Not in fear, but in calculation. She moved to Elias's side and stopped there, shoulder aligned with his knee, eyes fixed on the approaching stranger. Elias opened the door. The man smiled easily. He was in his late 30s, lean, with a runner's build and narrow shoulders that made him seem less imposing than he was. His beard was trimmed short, deliberate, and his hair, dark blonde, almost brown, was hidden beneath a knit cap pulled low. His eyes were pale gray and steady, the kind that measured distance without appearing to. "Afternoon," the man said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Name's Caleb Wright. I'm with Northline Logistics. We handle supply runs through this region." Elias nodded but didn't offer his name. Caleb continued anyway. "I was told there might be a dog matching a description staying out here. Large shepherd, injured leg." Juniper stiffened. Elias felt it immediately. The subtle shift in her breathing, the way her muscles locked as if a switch had been thrown. Caleb's gaze flicked briefly past Elias, catching the outline of Juniper behind him. His smile didn't change, but something sharpened behind it. "Beautiful animal," Caleb said lightly. "She wander in on you?" Before Elias could respond, Caleb added casually, "I believe her name used to be Juna." The effect was instant. Juniper froze. Not the tense readiness Elias had seen before, but a complete shutdown. Her eyes went distant, unfocused, her body rigid as stone. She didn't growl. She didn't retreat. She vanished inward. Elias's jaw tightened. "You've got the wrong place," he said evenly, "and the wrong dog." Caleb raised his hands slightly, palms open. "No offense meant, just checking. Company property goes missing sometimes." Elias held his gaze. "Then take it up with whoever lost it." For a moment the air between them felt thin. Caleb smiled again, this time smaller. "Of course, apologies for the intrusion." He stepped back, careful not to turn his back too quickly. Have a good day. As he walked away, Juniper didn't move, not until the sound of footsteps faded completely. When she did, her legs trembled violently beneath her. Elias knelt beside her at once, hand resting firmly against her shoulder. "You're here," he said. "You're safe." Juniper swallowed hard, breath hitching once before settling. Slowly, painfully, she leaned into his touch. She remembered, Elias muttered, and so had Caleb. The rest of the day passed under a low, waiting tension. Elias secured the cabin. Windows shuttered, lights kept low. He contacted Seth with a single message. "He found us." Seth's reply came minutes later. "I figured he would. Sit tight." As evening approached, Juniper paced restlessly, stopping often to listen. She avoided the door now, choosing instead the far corner where shadows pooled thickest. Her tail stayed low. Her ears twitched at every sound. This wasn't fear, this was preparation. Night fell fast. The first sign wasn't noise, it was absence. The wind dropped. The forest went unnaturally still, as if something had pressed pause. Juniper lifted her head. Elias reached for the flashlight and stopped himself. Darkness was an ally if you knew how to use it. The knock came, quietly once, then again, polite. Elias didn't answer. A voice drifted through the wood, calm and unhurried. "Let's not do this the hard way." Glass shattered at the side window. Elias moved instantly. He grabbed Juniper's harness and pulled her behind a stack of supply crates, positioning her where she had cover, but a clear escape route. Before he could issue another command, the door burst inward. Two men entered fast. The first was broad and heavy-set, face hidden behind a scarf, breath loud. The second moved with precision, lean, efficient, eyes already scanning. Juniper launched, not wildly, not recklessly. She hit the second man low, slamming into his leg and knocking him off balance before snapping once, clean and controlled, onto the hand holding a weapon. He screamed, dropping it instantly. The first man swung toward her. Elias closed the distance and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending both of them crashing into the wall. Wood splintered. Elias felt bone give beneath his grip and twisted harder until the man collapsed with a grunt. The second man tried to recover. Juniper was already gone. She repositioned near the door, blocking the exit, eyes locked, stance wide despite the injury. She didn't attack again. She didn't need to. She had bought time. Sirens wailed in the distance. The remaining intruder bolted, vanishing into the trees. Elias held the one beneath him until headlights flooded the clearing. Rangers arrived first, then local police, alerted by a quiet call Seth had made hours earlier, pulling strings he'd sworn he no longer used. As officers hauled the man to his feet and cuffed him, he twisted around, eyes burning with something close to panic. "That dog," he spat. "That thing shouldn't exist." Juniper flinched, not at the words, at the memory behind them. Elias stepped between them instantly. "She exists," he said flatly, "and you're done." The man laughed once, hollow and sharp. "You think this ends here?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Later, after the lights and questions and statements, Elias sat on the cabin floor beside Juniper. She shook violently now, not from cold, but from what had been dragged back to the surface. Elias pressed his forehead gently against her shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. Juniper lifted her head slowly and met his eyes. For the first time since he'd known her, there was something else there beneath the vigilance. Relief. By dawn, the forest had reclaimed its quiet. Juniper slept fitfully near the stove, twitching once or twice before settling again. Elias watched her chest rise and fall, steady at last. He knew the truth now. Juniper wasn't dangerous because of what she could do. She was dangerous because she remembered, and someone out there was afraid of that. The investigation unfolded without spectacle. There were no press conferences, no headlines splashed across screens in nearby towns. No helicopters circling Glacier. The forest did not echo with sirens again. Instead, things simply stopped happening. The old kennel site was quietly sealed off, yellow tape threaded through the trees like a warning meant only for those who already understood. Access permits tied to the land were revoked without explanation. A logistics company dissolved itself on paper, offices emptied overnight, phone numbers disconnected. Trucks that once moved through the park's service roads never returned. Absence became the loudest evidence. Elias watched all of it from a distance. He stayed in the cabin for several days, long enough for the adrenaline to drain from his system and leave behind something heavier. Exhaustion settled into his bones, the kind that sleep didn't fix, the kind that came when vigilance finally loosened its grip and allowed truth to surface. Juniper recovered slowly. Her leg healed enough for careful movement, though she favored it on cold mornings. The bandages came off in stages. Beneath them, scar tissue told stories no report ever would. She remained alert, always aware of exits, of changes in sound or air pressure. But something fundamental had shifted. She rested now. Not deeply, not fully, but she rested. Elias noticed it one evening when he returned from chopping wood and found her asleep on the porch, chin resting against her paws, body loose in a way it hadn't been before. The forest breathed around her. She breathed with it. She trusted the stillness. A government vehicle arrived on the fourth day. It was unmarked and unremarkable, the kind designed not to linger in memory. Elias watched it from the cabin window, posture relaxed but ready. Juniper lifted her head and observed, then lay back down. That more than anything told Elias this was different. The woman who stepped out was in her mid-30s, average height, athletic build. She wore plain outdoor clothes, dark jacket, jeans, boots, practical rather than polished. Her dark hair was pulled back into a low braid, streaked with copper where sunlight caught it. Freckles dusted her pale skin, especially across her nose and cheeks, a contrast to the sharp intelligence in her hazel eyes. She introduced herself as Hannah Cole. "I work with interagency wildlife and land use cases," she said, her voice steady, unadorned, "when they intersect with criminal investigations." She shook Elias's hand firmly, eyes assessing without judgment. "I grew up not far from here," Hannah continued. "I know these woods. I also know when something's been hiding in them." Inside the cabin, Hannah reviewed what little there was to review. Photos, notes, timelines that ended abruptly. She asked careful questions, never pushing beyond what Elias offered. When she noticed Juniper, she paused. "She's the one," Hannah said quietly. Juniper watched her from the corner of the room, head tilted slightly, eyes thoughtful rather than defensive. "She won't be required to testify," Hannah said, as if responding to a question Elias hadn't voiced. "Animals rarely are, and in this case, she doesn't need to." Elias frowned. "Then what happens to her?" Hannah leaned back, folding her hands loosely. "Officially, she's classified as a recovered asset from an unlawful operation." "Unofficially?" She met his gaze. "She's a liability no one wants to acknowledge." Juniper stood then and walked, slowly, deliberately, toward Elias. She sat beside him, close enough that her shoulder pressed lightly against his leg, not seeking protection, choosing proximity. Hannah watched the interaction carefully. "You'll be given a choice," she said. "She can be transferred to a closed rehabilitation facility. Secure, remote, She'd be monitored, evaluated, eventually placed somewhere quiet. Elias said nothing. Or, Hannah continued, you can take responsibility. The word hung between them. Responsibility, not ownership, not custody, responsibility. You understand what that means, Hannah added. It won't be easy. There may be follow-up questions, quiet ones, and you'll be agreeing to stay reachable. Elias looked down at Juniper. She looked back up at him, calm and present. No fear, no urgency, just waiting. Later that afternoon, Elias walked with Juniper down to the lake. The water lay flat and silver beneath the sky, thin ice clinging to the edges like fragile lace. Elias sat on a fallen log near the shore, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. Juniper approached the water carefully. She paused at the edge, inhaled, then stepped forward until her paws touched the ice. It cracked softly. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned and looked back at Elias. She took one more step. Elias felt something open in his chest. Not fear this time, but recognition. She wasn't testing the ice. She was choosing where to stand. The paperwork took less time than Elias expected. Hannah returned the next morning with a single folder. No thick files. No legal language meant to intimidate. Just signatures. Agreements written in plain terms. Juniper lay at Elias's feet while he read. When he hesitated, her tail brushed once against his boot, a grounding touch. Elias signed. Hannah watched him closely, then nodded. You know, she said, most people run from places like this. They leave as soon as the danger passes. Elias capped the pen. I used to. Hannah smiled faintly. Glacier has a way of deciding who stays. She left without ceremony. Days passed. The cabin transformed from a temporary refuge into something closer to a home. Elias fixed a broken latch. He cleared brush from the porch. He learned which floorboard creaked and which didn't. Juniper learned too. She learned the rhythm of Elias's mornings, the sound of his boots when he woke before dawn. She learned which trails he favored, where the wind curled oddly between rocks. She began to play again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. A stick carried proudly, a brief, awkward pounce at falling snow. Elias laughed one afternoon, the sound surprising them both. It came out rough, unused, but it stayed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mountains in golden shadow, Elias sat on the porch steps. Juniper lay beside him, chin resting on his thigh, eyes half closed. He thought of the mission he'd left unfinished, the moment he'd hesitated, the belief he'd carried since, that he'd missed his chance to do something right. He understood now how narrow that thinking had been. Second chances didn't arrive as clean slates. They arrived as responsibilities. As quiet decisions made in places no one else was watching. Juniper lifted her head slightly, pressing it more firmly against him. Elias rested his hand on her neck, fingers brushing the scar beneath her fur. We're staying, he said softly, not as a promise, as a fact. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of snow and water and pine. The lake remained. The mountains held their ground. Glacier was still beautiful, but now it wasn't a place to disappear. It was a place that had witnessed something endure. And in that endurance, Elias Hartman found what he hadn't known he was looking for. Not redemption, belonging. This story is not really about a man or a dog. It is about a moment most of us recognize, even if we have never stood beside a frozen lake or walked through a quiet forest. It is about what happens when someone is broken, discarded, or silenced, and yet still chooses not to become what hurt them. Juniper survived not because she was stronger than her suffering, but because she refused to surrender her conscience. She remembered who she was, even when others tried to erase her. And Elias did not save her because he was perfect or fearless. He saved her because when the moment came, he chose not to walk away again. That is where the miracle lives, not in thunder, not in spectacle, but in the quiet decision to stay. Many of us carry memories we wish we could bury, mistakes, losses, moments when we hesitated or felt abandoned. Like Elias, we may believe our chance has already passed. Like Juniper, we may feel marked by pain we did not choose. But God does not work only in beginnings or endings. He works in the middle, on ordinary days, in unseen places, through small acts of courage that say, I will not let this be the end. Sometimes God sends help in ways we do not expect. A stranger, a companion, a second responsibility that becomes a second chance. And sometimes God allows us to be the help someone else has been praying for. If this story moved you, consider who in your life might need hope today. Share this story with them. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to your heart. And if stories of faith, love, and second chances matter to you, please subscribe to the channel so more of these stories can reach those who need them. May God bless you and your family. May He protect you in moments of fear and doubt. And may He send the right hand at the right time when you need it most. Amen.